Well, Jeremiah chapter 24 is about a vision that Jeremiah has. This is something that God is showing Jeremiah through a spiritual vision that's going to teach him more about what's going on with Israel and what's going to happen basically with them. So let me give some historical background on this, okay? Just as we've talked about before, if you watch chapter 21, you've got a little bit of this as well. The historical background of this vision is of the first deportation of the people in 597 BC. Okay, remember there's three deportations, three exiles that happen. 597 was the first, 587 was the biggest one and the main one we hear about the most. Then there was another smaller one after that happened a couple years later. Maybe not a couple years later, but shortly after the big one. So in this, he says, after the exile of Jehoiachin and leading citizens of Judah, those who remained seem to have been full of optimism for the future. The new king Zedekiah even became involved in a conspiracy with the surrounding peoples for further rebellion against Babylon. The false prophets spoke of a quick return of the exiles from Babylon. Jeremiah saw that the attitude of the king and his supporters in Judah was wrong. True, there would be a new day for Judah and the people of God, but the future lay with the exiles and not with Zedekiah and his supporters. The current optimism led Jeremiah into a more determined and even more relentless ministry. Judah was still to face a judgment which would be far more devastating than any that had hitherto befallen. That's Thompson, out of his book of Jeremiah, mentions that. So we talked about how this is not, Jeremiah's book isn't chronologically ordered. So chapter 24 is kind of going back before chapter 21 and talking about the first exile, not the main exile, the first exile. So when that happened, people were worried, but they had a lot of confidence and promise that everything would work out, that Jehoiachin would return, that Israel would be saved, and everything would work out great. Well, it didn't work out that way. And that's what's happening at the time when Jeremiah gets this revelation. Okay, so let's get into this now. Verse 1, the Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. So in this vision, he's seeing the temple, he's seeing 2 baskets of figs. Now, if you're not familiar, figs is a fruit that comes off trees, kind of like a date or an apricot type of an idea, basically. It comes off of a tree. 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away the captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah, with the carpenters and smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon. So this is after the first exile is when this is happening, basically. Now, this is interesting because bringing, as part of the sacrifice, one of the sacrifices they talked about is the first fruits. So you take the first picking of your fruits, which is oftentimes your best picking, and you would bring those to the temple to offer to God as part of a sacrifice, basically. So this could be along those same kind of ideas, the concept. And now verse 2, he says, 1 basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe. So that, again, the first picking. And the other basket had very naughty figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. So these are the bad figs. This is not the type of offering you bring to the temple, basically. This is bad to do. So why would somebody bring this basket of bad figs? Okay. This could represent the people not offering with their whole heart. The bad figs, some people are worshiping God truthfully, and some people are not worshiping God truthfully. They technically did their obligation to offer, but inside they're not wanting to offer. They're going through the motion of offering, but they're not truly spiritually connected to it. They go to church, they pray, they do their calling, but they don't believe it inside. That's that hollowness. That's the bad figs kind of an idea. Verse 3, then he says, then said the Lord to me, what seest thou, Jeremiah? And I love this. This is a part of Revelation that happens a lot. We get this is so cool because this isn't God going, Okay, Jeremiah, let me explain what this metaphor is about. This is God saying, Jeremiah, what are you noticing? Let me get your opinion and your ideas of this. I love this. A good message for us in helping people understand the gospel is, where are they coming from? What do they understand? How can we start from there? So Jeremiah responds, and I said, figs, the good figs, very good, the evil, very evil, that cannot be eaten, they are so evil. So that's what he's seeing here, basically. So they're both at if you think about it, the good figs are really good. The bad figs are really bad. So we're seeing extremes in this, okay? In fact, Adam Clark had a comment to say about this. He said, under the type of good and bad figs, God represents the state of the persons who had already been carried captives into Babylon, with their king Jeconiah, or Jehoiachin, really, compared with the state of those who should be carried away with Zedekiah. Those already carried away, being the choice of the people, are represented by the good figs. Those now remaining and soon to be carried into captivity are represented by the bad figs, that were good for nothing. The state also of the former in their captivity was vastly preferable to the state of those who were now about to be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon. The latter would be treated as double rebels, the former, being the most respectable of the inhabitants, were treated well, and even in captivity a marked distinction would be made between them, God ordering it so. But the prophet sufficiently explains his own meaning. The Lord says, those already carried away into captivity I esteem as far more excellent than those who still remain in the land. They have not sinned so deeply, and they are now penitent, and therefore I will set mine eyes upon them for good. That's verse 6, and verse 5 kind of getting into this, basically. I will watch over them by a special providence, and they shall be restored to their own land. So that's Adam Clark's The Holy Bible with a commentary and critical notes. Mentions that. So that's what we're getting here, is this. So to catch back up, so we just read verse 3, verse 4, and again the word of the Lord came unto me saying, so this is verse 5, explaining the good figs. Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of Chaldeans for their good. You might not think of an exile as being a good thing, capturing you, kidnapping you out of your land, make you go to another land and have to start over. But God's saying this is for their good. So this is the first exile in 597 BC. They took some of the better part of the better people in Jerusalem and moved them out. They left the second-hand people in Jerusalem who had to deal with themselves. That's where Zedekiah comes in, and that's where that most of them get killed and destroyed, basically. They don't have a good experience. That's the challenge that's there, basically. So Thompson said, these are the people who went into exile first. Those who had been deported to Babylon 597 BC were in fact the cream of the country's leadership. All the officials, all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths, none remained except the poorest people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, his officials, and the chief men of the land. Among these were officials who had intervened on more than one occasion on Jeremiah's behalf. Those who were left probably lacked political skill and seemed to have been hostile to Jeremiah, for he suffered severely in the period between 597 and 586 BC. So again, these people are being spared what's about to happen in 10 years, basically. So he put them in exile to get them out of the way, which is, again, how he preserved the Davidic line through Jehoiachin. And now they're out there. Now the people have to live. So we have only people that are left are the wimpy politicians, the wimpy leaders. They have to reestablish their kingdom, reestablish the nation, and try to go. And they go really bad. And then 10 years later, they're going to be destroyed. That's the major destruction that's coming. So verse 6, I will set mine eyes upon them for good, and will bring them again to this land, and I will build them and not pull them down, and I will plant them and not pluck them up. So the people that were gone in the first exile a lot of them will come back. Them and their descendants will come back. That's how he's going to restart Jerusalem. That's how he's going to restart Judah, the remnant that will return and be the people that grow and then are gathered in later. The rest of them are mostly going to be destroyed. Some will probably survive. Their families, descendants will eventually come back. But it's going to be bad. So, and it's interesting. He says, I will build them up and not pull them down. So there's like an away, towards and away from pattern. I will plant them and not pluck them out. So another towards and away pattern idea. I'm going to go this way and not that way with these people. Verse 7, and I will give them an heart to know me. So the point of the exile is to help the people come to God again. That I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return unto me with their whole heart. Very important. So can God take a tragedy and turn it into something that actually turns for our benefit? Yeah, he can. It's right here. In fact, Thompson had an interesting thought about this. Verse 6 and verse 7, he says, the verbs to build up, tear down, and uproot are first met in chapter 1, verse 10, and repeatedly mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. They cover the double themes of judgment and restoration, which according to Jeremiah's call were to be at the heart of his preaching. It was his great grief that the bulk of his preaching was about judgment. His references to renewal by comparison are few. It will be granted to the exiles to know Yahweh and to form the nucleus of the renewed Israel, which will recognize Yahweh's sovereignty. They will return to him with their whole heart. Heart renewal could evidently come only after judgment. So the judgment was the very means by which the new beginning for God's people was to be achieved. An encouraging doctrine for those in exile and for those who would follow in 586 BC. So again, it is for their best good this is going to happen. They're super wicked. They're not turning to God. They're not listening to God at all. So God is going to let punishment happen. And through the punishment, they're going to go, oh, we did wrong. We need to come back and come back to God. This is that bottom half of the pride cycle, that section. They disobey God. They disavow God. God starts the destructions, the results of their choices, so justice. And they start to eventually realize, this isn't fun. I don't like this anymore. I need to come back to God. And then God blesses them as we go around that pride cycle. That's basically what's talking about here. That's what's happening. So verse 8, as we get into this, we can see this more as he talks about the figs in here again. He says in verse 8, and as the evil figs. So we've talked about the good figs. Now we're on the other basket, the evil figs. As the evil figs, which cannot be eaten, they are so evil. Surely thus saith the Lord, will I give Zedekiah the king of Judah and his princes and the residue of Jerusalem that remain in this land, and them that dwell in the land of Egypt. Now that's important to remember. The Jews who live in Egypt, when Babylon came through, there were a whole bunch of Jews that got out of town, fled to Egypt to get out of the way of Babylon's destruction. There's going to be more that's going to try that during the second exile, but they're not going to be quite as successful, but there's a bunch that left. They're going to be talked about a couple of times in the book of Jeremiah. So they're kind of a side part, but they're going to come back into play by the end of the book. So just keep an eye on them. Okay, that's what's going to be happening here with them. So those left in Jerusalem, as well as the pro-Egyptian groups who fled to Egypt, will be seen as the bad fruit. They're the ones that were left. They now are going to have to rule themselves, get a king, get all that together. That's where King Zedekiah, he gets appointed by Babylon, and then he has to rule and put the rulers back in place and things that occupy those offices again. And he's not going to have the cream of the crop leaders to do it with. He's going to have, the first string stuff's gone. He's dealing with bench warmers to reestablish the kingdom and the rule, basically. Now, what's interesting about this idea is they may have fled also when Jehoahaz was taken captive. Remember, Josiah's son Jehoahaz was taken captive by Pharaoh Necho back down to Egypt. So he could have been part of that group that fled with him as well, or when Jehoiachin became a Babylonian vassal state, maybe there's others that fled at that time as well. So we could be, when we talk about the people in Egypt, we could be talking about several groups that went over to Egypt to get out of the destruction of Jerusalem in that area, basically at the time. And so the people that are left and the people that fled are considered the bad fig, basically. Now, verse 9, and I will deliver them to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth for their hurt, to be a reproach and a proverb, to taunt and a curse in all places whither I shall drive them. So they're going to be scattered throughout the world and will be as a negative people for the rest of the world. That's what's going to happen, basically. They're going to be scattered and all over the place. Verse 10, I will send the sword, the famine, and the pestilence among them till they be consumed from off the land that I gave them and their fathers. Wow. They're going to be gone. So it'll be hard to live in Palestine, hard to live in that area, basically. They'll want to move away. They're going to want to get out of there until the gathering that God does later in the last days. It's not going to be a place to live. It will eventually be a better place to live, but it's going to be a while. And we'll see that basically happen. So that's where we're at. That's some of the challenges that are coming. So let's jump over to chapter 25 as we continue to learn more from Jeremiah.